Welcome back to Revenge Codex. My name is Sophia Jones. I'm 26 years old. And on a Tuesday morning in March, my husband handed me 2 suitcases, already packed, and told me to leave my own home. Not quietly. Not privately. He did it in front of his mother, his sister, and his best friend Marcus, who was leaning against the kitchen counter like he was watching a show he'd already seen before. The suitcases were sitting by the front door when I came downstairs. I remember the sound of the wheels, that hollow plastic rattle on hardwood, before I even processed what I was looking at. I remember the smell of the coffee I'd made for myself still sitting on the counter, untouched, steam curling up into nothing. I remember the way the morning light came through the window above the sink and made everything look almost beautiful, the way it does sometimes when something terrible is happening. Daniel was standing in the center of the living room with his arms crossed. That posture. I knew that posture. It meant a decision had already been made without me. "You need to go," he said. "I think we both know this isn't working." His mother, Patricia, was sitting on the couch I had picked out. She didn't look surprised. She looked like she'd been waiting for this. There was something almost satisfied in the way she held her coffee cup with both hands and stared at the floor. His sister, Renee, was near the hallway. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Marcus just watched. I looked at the suitcases, then at Daniel's, then at the suitcases again. And here's what I didn't do. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't raise my voice. I picked up my coffee from the counter, took one slow sip, set it back down, and I said, very quietly, "Okay." The room went completely still. What they didn't know, what none of them could have possibly understood in that moment, was that I had been waiting for this too. Just not in the way they thought. Before I go any further, where are you watching this from? Because I want to know if anyone out there has ever stood in a room full of people who were supposed to love you, and felt more alone than you'd ever felt in your entire life. If you have, stay with me. This story is for you. Let me tell you what everyone believed about me. They believed I was lucky. That I had married up. That Daniel, with his commercial real estate contacts, his weekend golf games, his mother who knew everyone worth knowing in our city, had done me some kind of favor by choosing me. I was the girl from the east side of town. My mother worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood. We weren't poor exactly, but we were close enough that I learned very early what it felt like to count things. Dollars. Days until the next paycheck. Options. Daniel and I had met at a work event. I was doing freelance graphic design at the time, brought in to handle visual branding for a corporate conference. He was one of the clients. He was charming. He was confident. He was, I thought, someone who would always know what to do. We dated for 8 months. Got engaged. Married within a year of meeting. And from the very beginning, his family had a story about me. A quiet one. Never said out loud in full sentences, just communicated through looks, through hesitations, through the way Patricia would correct how I set the table at Sunday dinners, or the way Renee would laugh a little too long at jokes made at my expense. The story was, Sophia is fine, but she's not quite enough. She doesn't quite fit. She got here by being pretty and available at the right moment. I knew the story. I heard it in every room I walked into. What they didn't know was the reality. The reality was that before I met Daniel, I had already spent 3 years building something. Quietly. Steadily. Without telling anyone. Because I had learned, growing up the way I did, that when you have nothing, the only protection you have is information that other people don't have about you. I had been investing. Starting small. The way you have to when small is all you have. Index funds. First. Then individual stocks I'd studied with the same obsessive attention. I'd given everything that actually mattered to me in life. Then, eventually, real estate. 2 small rental properties in my name alone, both acquired before I ever said, I do. I had also kept my freelance design work. Quietly, building a client base that, by the time I married Daniel, was generating more monthly income than I ever let on. I worked from home, just little projects, I called them when Daniel asked, waving a hand like it was barely worth mentioning. He never asked for specifics. He wasn't interested in specifics about me. He was interested in specifics about himself, which is a very different thing. And there was one more thing. The most important thing. But I'll get to that. The first year of our marriage was what I would describe, in retrospect, as the education. Not the kind you choose. The kind that happens to you. Slowly. In ordinary moments, you don't recognize as significant until later. There was the dinner party in October, 4 months after our wedding. Daniel's colleagues. Their wives. The usual Sunday best performance of a certain kind of life. I was talking to a woman named Claire. She was warm, genuinely curious, asked me about my design work with what felt like real interest. I was in the middle of telling her about a rebrand project I was proud of when Daniel appeared at my elbow, hand at the small of my back, and smoothly redirected the conversation toward himself. Claire turned to him. The moment evaporated. He didn't even realize he'd done it. That sentence mattered. He didn't realize he'd done it. Because it meant it wasn't cruelty, it was habit. And habits built over a lifetime don't change because someone loves you. There was the argument in February of our first year, when I suggested we consider investing a portion of our savings differently. I had done the research. I had numbers, projections, comparisons. I laid them out on the kitchen table on a Saturday morning like a person who knew what she was talking about, because I did. Daniel looked at my papers for approximately 4 seconds. I already have someone who handles that, he said, and went back to his phone. I gathered my papers, folded them, put them back in the folder they came from. I didn't realize it then, but that was the moment I stopped trying to be seen as a partner, and started thinking about what I was actually building, and for whom. There was Patricia, who arrived unannounced on a Wednesday in March, and rearranged my kitchen while I was in the next room working. I came out to find my spice rack completely reorganized. My coffee station moved, a pot soaking in the sink that had been in the cabinet. I hope you don't mind, she said, in the tone of someone who very clearly did not care if I minded. I smiled. Of course not, I said. And I meant it. Just not the way she thought. There was Renee, who referred to our home as Danny's house, so consistently and so naturally that I genuinely don't think she was aware she was doing it. Danny's house. As if I were a guest. As if my name were nowhere. Here's what they didn't know. My name was somewhere. Somewhere very specific. But again, I'll get to that. The disrespect had a rhythm. Once you learned it, you could hear it everywhere. It happened at family gatherings, where my opinions on anything outside of food or decor were gently talked over. It happened when Daniel's friends visited and the conversation split naturally, men in the living room, women in the kitchen, and no one questioned it. And I was expected to not question it either. It happened in the bedroom, in quieter, harder to name ways, in the slow withdrawal of interest, the presence that was technically there but felt like absence, the way a person can be in a room with you and somehow communicate that you are not the most important thing in it. It happened the day I overheard Patricia on the phone. I don't know who she was talking to, saying that Daniel could have done better, that the girl was sweet enough but didn't come from anything, that she hoped they didn't have children before he came to his senses. I was standing in the hallway of her house with a bottle of wine I'd brought for dinner. I stood there for a full minute after she hung up. Then I walked into the kitchen, set the wine on the counter, smiled, and said, "Something smells amazing. Patricia." What did you make? Remember that moment. The wine on the counter. The smile. Because that was the last moment of the old me. I just didn't know it yet. The shift didn't happen loudly. Real shifts never do. It happened 3 days later, on a Thursday evening, when Daniel came home late and distracted, and we sat down for dinner, and he ate without saying more than 11 words to me. I counted. I was that present for the absurdity of the moment. 11 words in 40 minutes of sitting across from each other. And I sat there. And I looked at him, this man I had built a life around. This man whose family had decided I was a placeholder, and something inside me went very, very quiet. Not sad. Not angry. Quiet. The way a room goes quiet right before someone makes a decision. I stopped reacting. And I started observing. There's a difference, a massive, consequential difference between those two things. When you react, you show people your triggers. You show them your edges, your soft spots, the places they can push to produce an effect. You make yourself legible to people who don't deserve that information. When you observe, you become illegible. You start to see patterns instead of feeling them. You start to understand the architecture of a situation instead of just standing inside it. I started to understand the architecture, and what I saw was this. Daniel didn't know what he had. He had never taken the time to understand who I was. He had built a story about me, the same story his mother had built, that his sister had echoed back to him, and he had settled into that story like a comfortable chair. He wasn't cruel. Exactly. He was incurious. Which in some ways is worse. He had no idea about the rental properties. He had never asked. Not specifically. I had told him early on that I had some savings and a few small investments, and he had nodded and moved on. He had never dug deeper, because he had never imagined there was anything deeper to dig. He had no idea about my freelance income. He knew I did design projects from home, but had never once asked to see a bank statement, never once expressed curiosity about the actual numbers. He had just assumed, because people like him often do, that anything I was doing was small. Decorative. A hobby dressed up as a job. He had no idea about the one thing that would matter most. And I, for the first time in 3 years, was grateful for his incuriosity. It had given me something priceless. Privacy. Room. The space to operate without observation. I opened my laptop that Thursday night. After dinner. After Daniel fell asleep on the couch in front of the television, and I began to plan. The silent preparation phase lasted 62 days. I tell you that number because it mattered, the precision of it, the patience of it. I was not rushing. I had learned, in the years before Daniel, in the counting years, that the difference between a desperate move and a powerful one is almost always just time. The first thing I did was call my attorney. Her name is Diana Marsh. She is 53 years old. She has silver hair she wears in a braid, and she has the most quietly terrifying mind I have ever encountered. I had retained her services 2 years earlier, not because I expected to need her, but because I had grown up watching what happened to women who had no one in their corner when things went wrong. I told Diana everything. The properties, the income, the business, the assets that were mine, clearly, unambiguously mine. And then I told her what I suspected was coming, because I had started to see it now, with my new observational clarity. The late-night phone calls Daniel took in the garage. The credit card statement I'd glimpsed with a restaurant charge for 2 on a night. He told me he was at a work dinner alone. The way he had become both more present and more distant, present in the house, but looking through me rather than at me. Diana listened. She asked 3 questions. And then she said, "Good. You're already in a better position than most women who sit in that chair." She began drafting. The second thing I did was formalize what had always been mine informally. The freelance business, which I had been operating under my own name as a sole proprietor, became an LLC. My name, my structure, my accounts, clearly delineated, clearly documented, completely separate from any shared marital finances. I want you to understand something about this. I was not being deceptive. Every asset I had came from work I had done, income I had earned, investments I had made, all of it prior to or completely separate from the marriage. I was simply making visible what had always been true. I was building the paper trail that would allow the truth to be undeniable. The third thing I did was the one that required the most patience. I need to go back in time slightly. Back to the year before I met Daniel, when I was 22 and working on a redesign project for a small tech startup in our city. The founders were a married couple, Helen and James Kowalski, who were brilliant at their product and less brilliant at their branding. I spent 6 months working with them. We became genuinely friends. 3 months before I married Daniel, James called me. He was separating from the company, creative differences with some new investors, and he was starting something new. Something significant. He wanted me on board. Not as a freelancer. As a partner. A silent partner. In the beginning, a small equity stake in exchange for my work on branding, identity, their entire visual and communicative architecture of what he was building. I said yes. I told no one. Not a single person. Not because I thought Daniel would forbid it. Because I had already learned, by then, that privacy was my most valuable resource. And because something in me, some quiet, calculating, clear-eyed part of me that I owe everything to, already understood that I might need this to be mine alone. In the 62 days of my silent preparation, the company, which I am not going to name here, for reasons that will become obvious, had its series of funding round close. Successfully. Significantly. My equity stake, which had been theoretical for 2 years, was now worth just over $1.4 million. I did not celebrate. I called Diana. She said, "Perfect timing," I said. I know, here is what was happening on Daniel's side during those 62 days. In case you're wondering. He was becoming more confident. That's the word I would use. He had made his decision. I could see it in the way he moved through the house. The way he'd stopped even performing interest in me. The way the phone calls in the garage became less guarded. He was building toward something, and he felt certain of their outcome. He had the house, or believed he did. He had his income, his family, his support structure. He had a story about me that made me small. And small things, when you remove them, don't leave a mark. He thought he was removing something small. Patricia came to the house more often in those 62 days. I noticed. She was doing what I can only describe as a preliminary inventory, running her hand along the kitchen counter, commenting on throw pillows I'd chosen, making small adjustments to things in the way that people do when they're preparing to inhabit a space. She wanted the house. Not just for Daniel, for herself. A place for Sunday dinners. A place that was hers by extension because it was her son's. Here's the thing about that house. We had purchased it 18 months into our marriage. The down payment, significant, just under $200,000, had come from a joint account. But the funds in that joint account had come from multiple sources. Some from Daniel's income. Some from mine. But the original seed, the deposit that made the account worth building in the first place, had been a transfer from one of my private investment accounts, made early in the marriage when Daniel was cash poor from a deal that had fallen through. Diana had the records. Every transfer. Every date. Every amount. The house, it turned out, was a more complicated conversation than Daniel had anticipated. But he didn't know that yet. He was still standing in the confidence of a man who had never had to examine his assumptions. The morning of the suitcases, I want to tell you. I wasn't surprised. I had been sleeping lightly for 2 weeks, not from anxiety, but from attention. Waiting. The way you wait for something you know is coming. When I came downstairs and saw them by the door, neat, upright, already packed, he had gone through my things. I noted that calmly, registered it as a data point. I understood that the timeline had arrived. His mother on the couch. His sister in the hall. Marcus at the counter. A little audience, gathered to witness my removal. To make it feel final. Official. To ensure I wouldn't resist in a way that could be privately revised later. You need to go, he said. And I said, okay, that word, just that word, shifted something in the room. I could feel it. They had expected tears. A scene. Bargainings. Accusation. They had a response prepared for all of those things. They had nothing prepared for calm. I picked up both suitcases without another word, walked to the door, and paused with my hand on the doorknob. I turned back once. Just once. My lawyer will be in touch, I said. Pleasantly. Like I was mentioning I'd left something on the stove. And then I left. The next 90 days were the ones that built the rest of my life. I stayed. For the first 2 weeks. With my friend Camille, we'd been close since college. She knew the whole story. She had never liked Daniel, but had been gracious enough not to say so often. She gave me her guest room and her good whiskey, and the kind of friendship that doesn't require explanation. I was not recovering. I want to be precise about that. I was not in a grief spiral, not drowning in self-pity, not plotting revenge in the petty sense of the word. I was operating. There's a difference. Diana was in full motion. The documentation was comprehensive. The records were clean. The legal position was, her word, excellent. She had filed the initial paperwork. She had sent the formal communication to Daniel's attorney, who, I learned later, called Daniel immediately after receiving it and said something to the effect of, "Who is this woman?" Exactly. Because there are some things here that change this conversation significantly. I imagine Daniel, receiving that phone call, beginning to understand for the first time that he had not actually known me. Meanwhile, the business was accelerating. James was extraordinary at what he did, and the company was growing at a pace that had started to attract attention. I was working from Camille's guest room, on branding campaigns that were genuinely some of the best work of my life, because when everything else has been stripped away and all you have is what you're actually good at, you discover the floor is higher than you thought. Week 6. Diana called to tell me that Daniel's attorney had come back with a settlement offer. It was embarrassing. Not in the sense that it was offensive, though it was, but in the sense that it revealed, more clearly than anything else could have, how little they thought I had. How little they thought I was worth. The offer was structured to make me feel grateful. To make me feel like I was being given something. I read it once. Put it down. Called Diana. Tell them no, I said. Tell them we'll see them in mediation. And tell them to bring everything, she laughed. Diana doesn't laugh often. I took it as a good sign. Week 8. I flew to San Francisco for 2 days. James's company had a meeting with a second-tier investor group that wanted a presentation of the full brand architecture I had built. I sat in a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor and walked 11 people through the visual identity system, the messaging framework, the long-term brand strategy, all of it. When I finished, the lead investor, a woman in her late 40s who I later learned was famously difficult to impress, said, "This is exactly what this company needed. This is serious work," I thanked her. I flew home. I didn't tell anyone except Camille. Week 10. Diana called again. "The mediation is scheduled," she said. "And I need you to be prepared for his reaction when he sees the full financial disclosure." How bad will it be? I asked. There was a pause. He's going to be very surprised, she said. About several things, good, I said. The mediation was on a Thursday. 10th floor of a downtown office building. Conference room with a long table and wide windows, and the kind of neutral, impersonal decor designed to signal that this is a place where things are settled, not felt. Daniel arrived first. I know this because I was deliberately 5 minutes late, not rudely so. But enough. Enough to make an entrance rather than be sitting there when he walked inches. Small things matter. Positioning matters. When I came through the door, he was sitting on one side of the table with his attorney, a man named Gary, who was good but not exceptional, and he looked up. And I watched his expression cycle through 3 things in about 2 seconds. Recognition. Assessment. Recalibration. I was wearing a navy suit. My hair was up. I sat down across from him like I had done this 100 times. He had not seen me in nearly 3 months. I looked rested. He did not. The mediator introduced the process, the standard language, the ground rules. And then Diana placed the financial disclosure documents on the table, our side of the disclosure, the full picture of what I had. I watched Gary pick up the first page. I watched him read. I watched him set it down and pick up the second page. I watched Daniel watching Gary, trying to read Gary's face for information. Gary's face gave nothing away, he was professional, but he leaned over and said something quietly to Daniel. And I watched Daniel's jaw tighten in the way it does when he's trying to process something unexpected and doesn't want to show it. The equity stake. That was the first surprise. The notation of a partial ownership interest in a company that had just closed its Series A was not what Daniel's attorney had been prepared for. It was not what Daniel had expected to see. It changed the math considerably. The rental properties were the second surprise. Both fully documented, both acquired before the marriage, both clearly delineated as separate property, but both generating monthly income that, when totaled over the course of the marriage, represented a contribution to the household that Daniel had genuinely not calculated. The business records were the third surprise. The LLC. The client list. The invoices, organized by year, showing a consistent income stream that was, I'll be precise, significantly more than Daniel had ever assumed or asked about. Daniel looked at me across the table. It was the first time, I mean this, the first time that I saw something like actual recognition in his eyes. Not affection. Not remorse. Just the bare, uncomfortable confrontation with a version of me that he had never allowed himself to see. Why didn't you ever, he started. His attorney put a hand on his arm. Daniel stopped. I said nothing. I had nothing to say. Not in that room. Not in that moment. The documents had said everything. The mediation took 4 hours. When it ended, the agreement was not what Daniel had intended when he handed me 2 suitcases on a Tuesday morning. It was not what his mother had envisioned when she sat on my couch with her satisfied expression and her coffee cup. It was not what Marcus had expected when he leaned against the counter like a spectator at someone else's story. The house they had gathered to witness me being removed from, the house Patricia had been conducting her quiet inventory of, was addressed directly in the settlement. Given the documented source of the down payment, given Diana's meticulous records, given the clear paper trail that showed the seed capital as mine, the outcome on the house was one that I will describe simply as fair. Actually fair. Not fair in the way Daniel had planned for. Fair in the way the actual facts demanded. He could buy out my share, at full assessed market value, or the house would be sold. He had 60 days to decide. He couldn't buy it out. Not quickly enough. Not without the kind of financial restructuring that would have required help he either didn't have or wasn't willing to ask for. The house sold. And on the 90th day after he handed me 2 suitcases and told me to go, on that specific morning, which I know because I checked, Daniel arrived at the house to retrieve the last of his belongings before the closing, and found that his key no longer worked. I had not arranged this. I want to be clear. The locks had been changed during escrow as standard procedure, and Daniel had simply, in the fog of everything that was happening, not received the new key yet. It was an administrative delay. Nothing more. But I thought about it. Standing in Camille's kitchen that morning with my coffee, knowing what was happening across town, I thought about it. The image of him standing on the front porch of what had been his certainty, key in hand, unable to enter. It felt like something completing itself. There's a version of this story where I become someone who gloats, where I make phone calls, where I send messages that say I told you so, where I perform my victory for an audience. I didn't do any of that. Not because I didn't feel it, because I did. There was satisfaction. Deep, clean, bone-level satisfaction of the kind that only comes when the truth finally has enough room to stand inches. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But I had learned, over those 3 years and those 90 days, that the most powerful thing about a real reversal isn't the moment, it's the life you build after it. The moment is just confirmation. The life is the actual work. Patricia called me once, after the mediation. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was, in its way, more revealing than anything she had ever said to my face, halting, recalibrated, careful in a way she had never been careful with me before. She used the word misunderstanding twice. She said she hoped we could talk. I never called back. Renee sent a text that said simply, "I'm sorry. I didn't understand, I read it." I sat with it for a while. Then I wrote back, "As I know. Thank you, that was enough." That was all that was needed. Marcus, the man who had leaned against my counter watching my removal like entertainment, I heard through Camille that he had, apparently, tried to reach out to Daniel with some version of, "Man, I don't think she was what we thought. I have no idea if Daniel received this well or not." Frankly, it didn't matter. What other people recalibrated in the aftermath was their business. My business was my own. I want to tell you about the Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the mediation. I had signed the lease on my new apartment 2 weeks earlier. 3rd floor. South-facing windows. My kitchen. My shelves. My spice rack organized exactly the way I want it, and never touched by anyone who didn't ask. I had my coffee, the good kind, made slowly the way I like it. I sat at my desk, by my window, in my space, and I opened my laptop. James had sent me an email with the subject line, "Next phase, the company was moving into a new market." He wanted to discuss expanding my equity position in exchange for leading the brand strategy for the launch. There were numbers in the email that I looked at for a long time, not from disbelief, but from the particular pleasure of seeing what 3 years of quiet, invisible, unacknowledged work had compounded into. I wrote back, "Let's talk." I'm inches. I closed the laptop. I sat there with my coffee and the morning light doing what morning light does, slanting in, making everything look like the beginning of something, and I thought about the moment I had stood in Patricia's hallway with a bottle of wine. That woman, standing there, absorbing what she'd heard, deciding, in that moment, not to perform anger, not to confront, not to collapse, not to demand acknowledgement from people who had already decided she wasn't worth it. She chose something else. She chose to see clearly, to plan carefully, to let the truth accumulate quietly, the way interest accumulates, the way water finds its way through, the way anything real eventually becomes undeniable. I thought about her with something that wasn't quite pride, something quieter. Respect. Maybe. Gratitude. You were right, I thought. It was worth waiting for. People ask me sometimes, when I tell this story, in the version I tell in person, To people I actually know, what I would have done differently. Nothing. I know that sounds impossible. I know it sounds like their answer person gives when they're performing peace they haven't actually found. But I mean it exactly. Every year of being talked over sharpened something. Every dinner where I was invisible refined something. Every dismissed idea. Every rearranged spice rack. Every 11-word meals. Every Danny's house. Each one of those things added weight to something I was building without realizing it. The clarity. The patience. The understanding that the most dangerous person in a room is never the loudest one. Daniel handed me 2 suitcases because he thought he was removing something inconsequential. What he actually did was give me back my own attention. My own resources. My own time. All of which I had been dividing carelessly, generously, invisibly between my actual life and a performance of smallness that I had never agreed to give. The suitcases freed me. I try to remember that. Not because I'm grateful to him, I'm not, particularly, but because the story that matters isn't what was done to me. It's what I chose to do with the space it created. Here's where I'll leave you. The company James and I built together, the one I've been careful not to name, has continued to grow. There will be more to say about that. Eventually. There are developments on the horizon that I've been watching quietly, planning for carefully, in the way I've learned to do everything that actually matters. I have work I love. A home that is mine. A lawyer I would recommend without hesitation to any woman in any room who has ever been handed a story about herself that didn't match the truth. And I have something I didn't have before, the absolute, unshakable knowledge of my own value. Not the performed kind, not the affirmations in the mirror kind, but the kind that's built from evidence. From documented proof. From a Series A disclosure, and a set of property records, and an LLC, and 4 hours in a mediation room where everything I had quietly built became officially, legally, undeniably mine. Daniel is, by all accounts, fine. He has moved on. I don't know the details and I don't need them. I hope, in whatever way, I'm capable of hoping for someone who handed me 2 suitcases in front of an audience, that he has learned something. That somewhere in the recalibration, following that Thursday morning in the conference room, something shifted in the way he understands what a person can be behind the story he's decided to tell about them. Maybe. Maybe not. It doesn't change anything on my side. My name is Sophia Jones. I'm 26 years old. And I am exactly who I always was. I just don't have to explain that to anyone anymore. The door is locked. The key is mine. And the view from my window this morning is extraordinary.